The sharp concrete lines of the corporate plaza in Berlin taught me that in the world of high-speed electronics, a human life is just an operational cost that can be easily deducted from the quarterly balance sheet. My name is Alexander Vance, and I am 35 years old, directing the Advanced Hardware Audit Division at the continental headquarters of Kruger Technological. One stormy Wednesday evening, while performing a deep forensic sweep on our new microchip patent acquisitions, I stumbled upon a parallel encrypted ledger. The hidden server files revealed that over 120 million euros of defense sector funding had been silently diverted into a private estate trust in Liechtenstein. My heart stopped when I traced the final authorization tokens, because the master digital signature belonged exclusively to my managing director and childhood mentor Baron von Kruger. Baron was a legendary titan of the German tech sector who had financed my education and whom I respected as my ultimate professional guide. I knew that exposing this level of institutional corruption would instantly spark a lethal corporate war, but my dedication to the truth left me no room to compromise. I immediately mirrored the complete transaction history onto a secure encrypted hardware drive and prepared a confidential brief for the European Federal Police. The hook dropped at midnight when my personal security codes failed at the main research floor and 3 private security contractors intercepted me inside the elevator bay. Baron stood near the grand panoramic window, holding a fabricated disciplinary file that accused me of selling highly classified military chip designs to an international syndicate in Prague. The first massive twist hit me like a physical blow when the local tactical police entered the boardroom with an official warrant, showing that the Liechtenstein Estate Trust was fully registered under my private passport number and personal bank credentials. I realized with absolute horror that Baron had engineered a flawless defensive trap to sacrifice his top auditor as the perfect corporate scapegoat. As the officers stepped forward to secure the heavy steel handcuffs, the automated clean room ventilation system suddenly ruptured, filling the entire floor with a dense blinding gas. A hand gripped my shoulder in the whiteout, pulling me through an emergency escape hatch and down into the dark network of the Berlin Underground Railway system before security could seal the building. My rescuer was Elena, a brilliant chief network engineer who had been abruptly fired by Kruger Technological the previous afternoon for raising red flags about the Liechtenstein server logs. Elena threw a tactical burner phone into my lap and told me that our only chance of survival was to reach a secure digital data sanctuary in Vienna before our faces were broadcasted to every border checkpoint. We boarded a private international night train using falsified maintenance crew badges that Elena had secured from her remaining contacts inside the infrastructure department. As the train raced toward the Austrian border, the burner phone vibrated with a secure high-definition video call from an unlisted satellite network operating out of Zurich. The screen activated to reveal the face of Clara Kruger, the exiled younger daughter of Baron, who had been completely stripped of her inheritance 5 years ago. Clara looked at me with a cold, sharp smile and explained that the 120 million euros was a down payment for a massive hostile corporate takeover. The shocking twist came when Clara revealed that Baron was using the stolen defense funds to buy a controlling interest in a private satellite array that monitored the communication infrastructure of the entire European banking grid. If Baron finalized the transaction during the upcoming emergency electronic summit in Munich, he would possess the absolute power to blind the central bank and erase any corporate audit trail instantly. Clara offered to provide the decryption protocols for her father's offshore network if we agreed to help her seize control of the Kruger board of directors during the summit. We needed to capture a physical master hardware token containing the secondary encryption keys, which was currently locked inside a high-security vault aboard Baron's private luxury helicopter traveling from Berlin to Munich. Just as I accepted the high-stakes alliance, the train brakes screeched violently, and the metal side doors of our carriage were blown open by a tactical assault team hired by the Kruger family to terminate us on sight. The shockwave from the explosive breach threw Elena and me to the floor of the train carriage as the tactical team flooded the space with red laser sights. Alexander did not hesitate, grabbing Elena's tactical bag and pulling her through the ruptured metal side panel into the deep snow banks beside the tracks. We scrambled down a steep concrete ravine into the dark Bavarian forest, the sound of automatic weapons shattering the frozen air above our heads. Elena pulled out a portable signal jammer, hacking the local cellular tower to loop the mercenaries' tracking devices and buy us 15 minutes of total thermal invisibility. The hook arrived when we reached a deserted rural road and found a high-powered sports car waiting with its engine purring softly in the dark. Sitting in the driver's seat was none other than Julianne, Baron's personal administrative director, who calmly told us to get in if we wanted to survive the night. Julianne accelerated down the dark autobahn toward the Austrian border, her digital navigation screen scanning for local federal police interceptors. I watched her through the rearview mirror, knowing she had been Baron's most trusted shadow and possessed the biometric bypass codes for his entire technological empire. The first massive twist occurred when Julianne handed me an encrypted tablet showing a live video feed of my mother's apartment in Munich being raided by private security teams. Julianne confessed that she was not helping us out of kindness, but because Baron had recently discovered she was secretly copying financial data for the Ministry of Justice. Baron had already authorized a permanent termination protocol against her, meaning Julianne was next on the elimination list, and her only option was to use my financial codes to destroy the Kruger dynasty before they could silence her forever. We reached a private airfield near Salzburg just as Baron's luxury transport helicopter, the Iron Hawk, was preparing to lift off for the Munich Summit terminal. The entire hangar perimeter was locked down by private military contractors, making entry through the main tarmac doors an absolute impossibility without an active biometric clearance. Julianne used her master administrative override to trigger a false fuel pressure emergency in the helicopter's main engine, forcing the flight crew to evacuate the cabin. Elena and I used the temporary chaos to breach the rear executive lounge, moving silently through the carbon fiber corridor toward Baron's personal air office. The next major hook dropped when we finally cracked the electronic safe inside his desk and found the velvet compartment completely empty. I stared at the empty safe while the heavy steel security doors of the helicopter lounge suddenly slammed shut, trapping us inside the reinforced cabin. The massive digital display on the bulkhead flickered to life, revealing the cold, triumphant face of Baron sitting in a private suite at the European Parliament building in Brussels. Baron smiled, informing us that the master hardware token was already inside a diplomatic pouch on its way to the Munich summit via a heavily armed ground convoy. The major twist hit me like a physical blow when Elena's phone buzzed with a bank notification showing that her frozen accounts had just been credited with 25 million euros from Kruger Technological. Elena looked at me with a cold, expressionless smile, stepped through a hidden pneumatic escape panel in the wall, and left me alone as the security teams began breaching the reinforced doors. Alexander used a heavy fire axe to shatter the reinforced glass of the emergency exit window, dragging himself and a semi-conscious Julianne onto the tarmac, just as the guards opened fire. We tumbled down the concrete embankment into the dark, freezing waters of a nearby river, swimming beneath the industrial shipping barges to evade the sweeping searchlights. We crawled onto a deserted dock, our bodies shivering and our resources completely depleted, but our determination to expose the massive fraud was stronger than ever. We knew the final confrontation would take place in Munich in less than 3 hours, where the emergency summit was scheduled to finalize the digital banking takeover. Clara Kruger was already waiting for us at a private warehouse near the city center, holding a secondary virus that could intercept the diplomatic pouch data if we could get close enough to the convoy. The high-speed pursuit across the German border ended at a secluded warehouse where Clara Kruger was waiting next to a twin-engine armored transport van. Clara did not waste a single second, shoving us into the tactical cabin as the heavy engine roared, lifting our spirits as we tore into the gray morning light. She connected her quantum terminal to the European satellite array, tracking the real-time GPS coordinates of the armored convoy moving through the hills of Bavaria. The hook arrived when Clara showed us that Elena had not just betrayed us for 25 million euros, but was actually the biological daughter of the defense contractor, who was funding Baron's entire satellite coup. This meant the betrayal inside the helicopter hangar was a choreographed corporate performance, designed to eliminate any independent auditors who could expose the network to the central bank. The armored van skimmed the back roads of the dense forest, avoiding international traffic cameras by maintaining a dangerous speed just below the legal limit. As we closed in on the Munich city limits, Julian noticed 3 black armored transport units moving in a tight defensive diamond formation on the highway below. Clara explained that the lead transport vehicle contained the diplomatic pouch with the physical hardware token required to validate the 120 million euro transfer. The first major twist of the morning occurred when a sudden localized electromagnetic pulse disabled our van's main engine, causing the control panels to flash red before dying completely. Baron had anticipated a tactical ground interception and had equipped his convoy with electronic warfare systems that were now pulling our vehicle into a fatal spin. The driver managed to execute a hard drift landing in a mud field next to the highway, the heavy impact snapping the van's front axle assembly. Julianne and I broke through the fractured windshield, dragging Clara into the high brush just as the vehicle's fuel lines exploded into a massive tower of black smoke. We utilized the thick smoke as a tactical screen, sprinting toward the highway before the armored convoy security teams could assess the crash site. I noticed the driver of the secondary armored vehicle had stepped out to inspect the explosion, leaving his tactical cabin door completely unsecured with the engine running. I did not hesitate, leaping into the armored driver's seat while Julianne locked Clara into the reinforced passenger hold behind me. I slammed the armored vehicle into gear, ramming the lead transport car at maximum velocity and forcing it through the concrete guardrail into a shallow ravine. Violent impact triggered the lead vehicle's automated safety systems, popping the rear cargo hatches open and sending the silver diplomatic pouch sliding across the wet asphalt. Julianne leaned out of the side portal, using a mechanical retrieval tool to snatch the pouch just as the mercenary forces opened fire with automatic weapons against our armored glass. I shifted into overdrive, flooring the accelerator and racing toward the city center of Munich, where the international summit was already underway. The next hook dropped when we unsealed the diplomatic pouch and discovered that the hardware token was flashing a digital self-destruct sequence, with exactly 15 minutes remaining. Julianne used her technical knowledge of Kruger security systems to freeze the self-destruct counter at 45 seconds, buying us just enough time to breach the convention center. The entire Bavarian banking district was gridlocked by media crews and diplomatic escorts, the glass towers glowing under the overcast sky. We abandoned the scarred armored vehicle in the VIP parking garage, entering the main facility through a restricted basement utility tunnel while wearing the security uniforms from the convoy. The major twist hit us when we stepped into the grand gallery and saw Baron already standing at the center podium, delivering his presentation on the new satellite banking network to hundreds of global investors. Sitting directly behind her in the front row of the executive board was Elena, who was currently holding the master tablet that was receiving the final authorization layers of our stolen funds. I walked directly down the center aisle of the grand gallery, discarding my security visor and holding the silver hardware token high above my head for the cameras to broadcast. The entire auditorium fell into an absolute silence as Baron stopped speaking mid-sentence, his face turning from absolute confidence to frozen terror within a fraction of a second. I shouted into the main television pool microphone that the entire satellite banking network was a fraudulent operation funded by stolen reserves from the Liechtenstein clearing channel. The hook dropped when Elena calmly stood up, tapped her master tablet twice, and activated the facility's high-security lockdown protocol, causing heavy steel shutters to seal every entrance and exit. She smiled at the panicked investors, announcing that the local police response had been delayed by a prepaid corporate contract, and no one would leave the room until the transfer completed. The crowd of international investors erupted into panic as 15 armed private contractors entered from the stage wings, their automatic weapons pointed directly at the assembly. Baron demanded that I surrender the hardware token immediately, stating that if I refused, his legal team would execute a global liquidation order that would destroy the savings of millions of European citizens. The massive twist occurred when Clara Kruger stepped onto the main stage from the rear curtains, holding a satellite uplink connected directly to the governors of the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. Clara revealed that she had used the last 45 seconds of the frozen countdown to execute an emergency administrative freeze, completely locking Kruger Technological out of the continental clearing grid. The massive digital displays behind Baron suddenly glitched, replacing his corporate presentation with a live broadcast of federal agents raiding the Kruger headquarters back in Berlin. Every single one of Baron's hidden offshore accounts was displayed on national television in real time, exposing his global network of bribes and political manipulation to the entire world. The armed contractors realized their employer assets were permanently frozen and they would never receive their multi-million euro operational fees, so they slowly lowered their weapons and retreated through the basement tunnels. Baron collapsed into his chair, his multi-billion-dollar dynasty ruined in front of the global financial elite, while the international anti-fraud units finally breached the main doors to place him under arrest. Elena tried to lose herself in the chaotic crowd of investors, but Julian blocked her path with a federal detention warrant signed by the European Supreme Court. As the authorities led Baron and Elena away in handcuffs, Clara turned to me with a cold, calculating expression that perfectly matched her father's old style. She thanked me for my incredible service to the Kruger family, but then presented me with a termination agreement that stripped me of my seniority and banished me from the financial sector entirely. The ultimate twist arrived when I examined the fine print of the agreement and realized that Clara had used the administrative freeze to buy up all the distressed shares herself, turning her into the new absolute ruler of Kruger Technological. I looked at Clara and smiled, refusing to sign the contract because I had anticipated her betrayal from the moment we boarded her transport van in Salzburg. Before stepping into the Grand Gallery, Julianne and I had rewritten the core protocol of the hardware token to ensure the 120 million euros never returned to the Kruger accounts. The entire fortune had been permanently routed into an independent trust fund managed by the original green energy engineers whom Baron had defrauded 6 years ago. I walked out of the Munich Convention Center into the fresh evening air, a free man with an unburdened conscience, knowing that while I no longer held a corporate title, I had executed the most perfect corporate justice in the history of the continent. The temporary peace vanished by Wednesday morning as the sudden collapse of Kruger Technological created a massive liquidity vacuum that threatened to destabilize the entire German banking sector. I was sitting in a quiet bistro in Brussels when an unmarked armored limousine pulled up to the curb and 2 federal agents requested my immediate assistance. They escorted me to the maximum security wing of the European Commission, where a senior director named Eleanor Vance was waiting for me inside a soundproof tactical briefing room. Eleanor explained that while I had secured the green energy funds, an anonymous financial entity based in Zurich was currently buying up the compromised debt of our partner banks to gain total control over the infrastructure. The hook arrived when she revealed that this entity was utilizing a highly advanced automated trading algorithm to force the banks into a state of artificial bankruptcy before Friday morning. Eleanor offered me a position as a chief federal investigator with diplomatic immunity, tasking me with tracking down the master servers of the Zurich entity before the market opening. She provided me with a secure quantum terminal that had direct entry into the encrypted transaction backbones of the Swiss interbank clearing system. The first massive twist of the afternoon occurred when I logged into the network and analyzed the structural lines of the automated trading algorithm. The master source code was not the product of a foreign state or a traditional hedge fund, but was an identical copy of a risk optimization program I had written myself during my early years at Kruger Technological. Someone had breached my private server years ago, and was now using my own design to systematically dismantle the European financial architecture. I realized with absolute certainty that only one person possessed the access codes to steal that specific software: my former childhood friend David, who had supposedly perished in a Swiss Alpine accident 2 years ago. Julianne and I immediately caught an express train to Zurich, tracking the active transmission source of the algorithmic trades to a subterranean facility beneath an old watch factory near the lake. We breached the underground complex using Julianne's security overrides, navigating through rows of humming liquid-cooled server arrays that were generating an immense amount of thermal energy. The hook dropped when we reached the central monitoring hub and found David alive, sitting in front of a wall of glowing data displays, his face scarred, but his smile as sharp as ever. David explained that he had simulated his own passing to escape Baron's surveillance, and had been operating from the shadows to execute his ultimate retaliation against the banking elite. He had used my risk algorithm to map the exact structural vulnerabilities of the market, allowing him to siphon billions from the collapsing Kruger empire without triggering any regulatory alarms. The massive twist arrived when David activated a secondary monitor showing a live feed of Eleanor's federal office in Brussels, revealing that she was his primary partner in this global conspiracy. Eleanor had not hired me to stop the entity. She had used my federal investigation as a legal screen to locate the remaining central bank security blocks, so David could completely delete them before the Friday deadline. David offered me an equal share of the new digital financial system they were creating, stating that with my risk management and his infrastructure control, we could dictate the economic policy of Europe. If I refused, Eleanor would instantly activate a fabricated treason file that would frame me for the entire banking collapse, ensuring I would spend the rest of my life in a federal penitentiary. I looked at Julianne, who had silently connected her portable tracking drive to the main server framework, while David was busy explaining his grand design for corporate dominance. I looked David straight in the eyes and told him that his deployment of my algorithm had a fundamental vulnerability that he had completely overlooked because he forgot who designed the security architecture. Before David could reach for his security alarm, Julianne pressed the execution sequence on her portable drive, injecting a destructive deletion worm directly into the heart of the master processor array. The displays across the wall began to shatter with error messages, the clean lines of financial transactions, turning into chaotic static as the system began to wipe its own core database. David lunged forward in absolute rage, but I wrestled him to the floor, pinning him down before he could access the emergency hardware override switch on his desk. The hook came when the heavy pneumatic security doors of the hub suddenly slammed shut and locked, trapping us all inside while the automated fire suppression system began to flood the sealed room with carbon dioxide. Eleanor had been monitoring the server status from Brussels, and the moment she detected the deletion worm, she activated the facility cleanup protocol to eliminate all remaining witnesses. The oxygen levels inside the central hub plummeted rapidly, making it almost impossible to breathe or maintain focus while the emergency sirens wailed through the smoke. Julianne managed to bypass the electronic lock panel using a high-voltage probe from her gear, creating a temporary circuit short that forced the pneumatic doors to slide open by a few inches. We dragged ourselves through the narrow opening into the main corridor, leaving a desperate David behind as he scrambled to save his burning storage drives from the overheating server racks. We escaped the subterranean facility just as the main electrical transformers exploded, sending a massive shockwave through the quiet streets of Zurich. The twist occurred when my burner phone received a direct message from Eleanor stating that the false treason files had already been delivered to Interpol, and our faces were now on every international border monitor. We knew remaining in Switzerland was a death sentence, so we used a high-powered motorboat to cross Lake Zurich under the cover of a sudden storm, heading toward the Austrian border. Julianne contacted an underground network of independent technical contractors who provided us with an unmarked transport van filled with obsolete industrial equipment to mask our passage through the checkpoints. As we drove through the freezing mountain passes, I opened the quantum terminal, which had managed to salvage a single data fragment from David's master server before the explosion. The hook dropped when I decrypted the fragment and discovered that Eleanor was not the true architect of this conspiracy, but was acting on direct orders from a hidden committee inside the Bank for International Settlements in Basel. This hidden committee was planning to use the artificial banking collapse to force the entire European continent into a centralized digital currency network that they would control absolutely from behind closed doors. The upcoming Friday market opening was their absolute deadline, meaning we had less than 24 hours to expose the Basel Committee before the economic sovereignty of the continent was permanently lost. We arrived in Basel early Thursday morning, blending into the sea of corporate executives walking through the modern financial district where the high-security tower stood. Julianne managed to tap into the tower's main fiber optic trunk line, providing us with a live audio feed of the executive boardroom where the committee was currently finalizing their launch protocol. The major twist of the morning hit me like a physical blow when we heard the voice of the committee chairman, which belonged exclusively to my billionaire father, who had supposedly lost everything during the original Kruger technological collapse. My father had sacrificed Baron, his own partners, and his legacy as a grand opening gambit, positioned himself at the head of this new global banking authority, proving his greed had no limits. He was currently instructing Eleanor to finalize the market crash sequence, completely indifferent to the fact that his actions would ruin the financial futures of millions of families across the continent. I felt a cold, unyielding rage replace my physical exhaustion, realizing that the final adversary in this entire corporate nightmare was the very man who had given me my name. Julianne and Alexander spent the next 10 hours in the hidden tram depot safe house, using the quantum terminal's processing power to build a high-frequency decryption weapon that could pierce the Basel Tower's master server vault. We knew physical entry into the skyscraper was impossible due to the advanced facial recognition scanners and armed security teams patrolling every floor. Our only option was to broadcast our decryption worm directly into the bank's satellite uplink dish during the final committee session on Thursday night. We climbed to the roof of an adjacent commercial building in the freezing rain, calibrating a directional microwave antenna to target the bank primary receiver across the street. The hook dropped when the antenna secured a stable connection and my laptop began downloading the committee private ledger files, exposing every bribe paid to Eleanor and the directors. Just as the download progress reached 90%, the heavy metal roof door behind us was kicked open by a tactical assault team wearing unmarked black combat armor and holding silenced weapons. The leader of the team stepped forward, raising his ballistic visor to reveal Clara Kruger, who had traded her designer corporate suit for tactical gear to finish her family dirty work personally. Clara smiled, informing us that my father had offered her the position of global chief executive of the new digital currency network if she eliminated us tonight. The massive twist occurred when Alexander pulled an emergency signal flare from his jacket and fired it directly into the bank communication dish across the street, creating a massive electrical explosion that lit up the Basel sky. The sudden blast overloaded the regional relay array, short-circuiting Clara's tactical headsets and giving us the perfect moment to dive down the building, fire escape into the dark streets below. We ran through the wet alleys of Basel, the sound of Clara's mercenaries echoing behind us as they pursued us with relentless corporate efficiency. We managed to reach a secondary safe house inside an old industrial warehouse, where the quantum laptop finished compiling the stolen committee data, despite the damage to our antenna network. I now possess the absolute proof of my father's global conspiracy, Eleanor's federal corruption, and Clara's involvement in the satellite sabotage. The hook arrived when my terminal screen suddenly flashed an incoming priority transmission from the director of the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C., who had been secretly monitoring our progress through a secure back channel. The director informed us that my father had already initiated the market crash sequence, 12 hours ahead of schedule, meaning the European markets would collapse in exactly 60 minutes. The major twist of the night hit me when the IMF director revealed that Eleanor had just authorized an elite federal strike team to breach our safe house and destroy the quantum laptop before we could broadcast the evidence. I realized that running away was no longer an option, so I decided to play the ultimate high-stakes corporate card by broadcasting the entire database directly to every major media outlet in the world simultaneously. Julianne used her rogue engineering skills to hijack the local television and radio frequencies across the entire European continent, replacing the standard programming with the face of my father negotiating the artificial market crash. Within minutes, the live broadcast went viral on social media, triggering an immediate and unprecedented public uprising against the Basel Banking Committee. The federal strike team arrived at our safe house just as the broadcast concluded, but instead of arresting us, their commanding officer received a direct order from the Prime Minister office to stand down immediately. The public outrage had forced the European governments to launch an emergency independent investigation, stripping Eleanor of her federal authority and freezing the assets of every director on the Basel Committee. My father Grand Gambit had collapsed in a single hour of total media exposure, his dream of a unified digital currency empire completely ruined by the very son he had tried to eliminate. Clara Kruger was captured by local police while trying to flee across the German border in a stolen vehicle, ending her short-lived corporate career in total disgrace. Eleanor Vance was arrested at her luxurious desk in Brussels by a team of international prosecutors, her career over and her diplomatic immunity permanently revoked by the European Parliament. David managed to disappear into the Swiss mountains once again before the authorities could track his location, leaving behind an empty server room and a mysterious encrypted message on my personal terminal. The note simply said that a true master of risk never relies on a single algorithm, suggesting that he had already moved a substantial portion of the stolen funds into a completely untraceable offshore network. I walked out of the tram depot safe house into the calm morning light, knowing that while the immediate economic crisis had been averted, the corporate underworld would always find a way to rebuild its shadow networks. Three weeks later, I was formally invited to the Grand Assembly Hall of the European Parliament in Strasbourg, where the remaining heads of state were gathering to rebuild the financial regulatory framework of the continent. The president of the Commission stepped forward, presenting me with the highest civilian honor for corporate integrity and offering me the position of chairman of the new European Financial Stability Board. This role would give me the ultimate authority to monitor, audit, and regulate every single banking conglomerate operating from Madrid to Berlin, ensuring that a conspiracy like my father's could never happen again. I looked out at the massive applause from the international audience, feeling a sense of deep accomplishment. But the hook dropped when my assistant handed me an urgent red folder that had just arrived from the Zurich Central Archive. Inside the red folder was a newly filed corporate registration document showing that a massive international conglomerate named Vance Global Trust had just been established in London. The master shareholder list was completely hidden behind a complex wall of anonymous trust funds, but the digital signature used to authorize the multi-billion euro capitalization was unmistakably my father's private encryption key. The shocking twist was that my father had managed to leverage his hidden assets to negotiate a secret plea deal with the British authorities, allowing him to avoid prison by turning over his remaining committee partners, while keeping his secret wealth intact. He was no longer in a federal cell, but was currently sitting in a private penthouse in Mayfair, preparing to launch a hostile takeover of the very stability board that I had just been hired to lead. I realized in that definitive moment that the corporate jungle never truly sleeps, and that biological bloodlines would always find a way to return to the battlefield of immense wealth and power. Julianne and Alexander stood beside me as I took the oath of office, their expressions hardening into total resolve as they saw the data inside the red folder. We had won the battle for Frankfurt, Zurich, and Basel, but the true war for the financial soul of the Vance dynasty was only just beginning on a much larger global stage. I walked to the central podium of the Parliament Hall, looking directly into the main television camera, knowing that my father was watching the live broadcast from his luxury penthouse in London. I delivered my inaugural speech with absolute confidence, announcing an immediate, comprehensive forensic audit of every single anonymous trust fund operating within the United Kingdom, effectively declaring an all-out corporate war on my father's new empire before he could even launch his first hostile takeover attempt. As the cameras flashed and the audience cheered, my phone buzzed with a final text message from an unlisted number containing a real-time video of Elena standing on a private yacht in Greece, holding a glass of champagne and smiling as she watched my speech on a digital screen, proving that in this high-stakes game of corporate drama, the players might change their locations, but the pursuit of total dominance never truly ends.